listening to the smooth groove sounds of Tyler Blanton and his Hornē Electric Band on the greatest little live show in the land. That's right, Brooklyn, it's B-Side, and I am your host, Queen GodIs, here to introduce you to musician, composer, and vibraphone guru, Tyler Blanton. Give it up one more time. Welcome. So let's start with this. We'll save the Hornē Electric Band conversation for a little bit later. Tell us where you're from and how you made your way into New York and then now Brooklyn.
Okay, well, so I grew up in Southern California in a little town called Ojai, which is north of Los Angeles. Little kind of hippie retreat town. It's best known for, that was where Krishnamurti set up his kind of, I don't want to say the word cult. I don't think that's the right word for it, but he set up his thing. So it's known for Krishnamurti. But it's just a small town in Southern California. And I ended up in New York in my late 20s, just out of pursuit of music and being drawn to the music that was happening in pretty much in Brooklyn mostly, the music that was happening and the people that I was surrounded by that were gravitating here for that.
Well, I do want to talk more about how music came into your life back in the young days of California, but before we do that, I love to, we can't go any further in the show unless we're very clear about what your relationship to Brooklyn is.
Oh, interesting. So when I moved to New York in 2006, and at that time, about half the musicians I knew lived in Brooklyn, and half lived in Queens. Okay. Because nobody can afford to live in Manhattan. Okay. Right? So it was kind of this push and pull of like, oh, you could live in Astoria or Brooklyn, and I decided, well, I'm going to try living in Brooklyn because I went there first and I saw my way around. I thought, oh, this would be, I'll start here. And as a result, it turned out that everybody I knew and played music with ended up moving, kind of coming over to Brooklyn in the years that followed. Okay. But at first, I remember renting a room here somewhere out in Crown Heights and getting up in the morning, looking around and going, wow, how I live here? Yeah. It was really, coming from California, it was a really big
It is big.
Lifestyle adjustment. So,
well, let's not give them too much of the Brooklyn story away. Let's save some for mid-range. But now let's go back to California. What was the first, if there's such a moment, what was the first song you heard or the first group of musicians that you saw that really inspired you to say, I really want to do this? Who were they? What was it?
Oh, interesting. Well, I think for me, my story, it wasn't like one hard and fast moment. It was more of just a time in my life that things became more and more clear to me that I was playing percussion and drums and starting to play on marimba and vibraphone. And I started listening more and more to jazz and funk and different things that had the vibraphone in it. Okay. And I just found myself, I realized after a while that all I really was doing was listening to music or playing music day in and day out. And it became clear to me that, well, I guess this is really what I want to do every day. I might as well go all the way in. Yeah. You reach a point where you're like, well, if I look at what I did this last week or the week before or the month before, okay, well, I guess I'm kind of I've decided by just continuing down what my interests are. So it was kind of a stretch of maybe a year or so that I went from doing some music and listening to some music to pretty much only doing that 24/7.
Well, what's cool is that, some people get inspired to go into music not necessarily because of an instrument or a series of instruments, but because of the sound or the way the sound made them feel at a particular moment in their life. But with you have a very interesting story because the instrument is such a big highlight of this journey for you. So you mentioned marimba, which is kind of the great-great-great-great-grandparent of this instrument that you're playing today. Right. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. But how do you go from the marimba and the vibraphone to now what you are presenting to the world as the Hornē Electric Band? So what we know is that you used to have Tyler Blanton Trio.
Yeah.
And a trio is generally drums, double bass, and piano. But your version of a trio is different because you do not play the piano as part of your sound. And so then you moved on to a quartet, and now you're here with this quintet, who we want to introduce because they're a lot of fun. Y'all have no idea. Brace yourselves. So with the quartet is usually when you add a horn section, and now we have all of this involved. So tell us briefly about how you made that transition to this layout, and then introduce these guys.
Okay, yeah. So when I'm playing, should I talk about the instrument as well?
We'll go into the instrument a little bit later, but let's get them in here because
all right. So the Hornē Electric Band. So this came. It started out that I would play the electric vibe setup with bass and drums, and we were doing a lot of shows around town, and Massimo was doing it, and we got Corey involved. And
Massimo is who?
Massimo's the bass player
on
back
bass.
there.
Massimo on bass.
Can the camera reach that? Yeah.
Yeah, we got him.
And at one point I said, oh, it'd be nice to have a horn player, so I added a horn player. I thought, oh, heck, let's add another horn. Let's get a trumpet involved too. And we're rehearsing in my small apartment where, we're up against each other's elbows. And the nature of the band is we start just kind of riffing on things. We start talking about things and making jokes, and it keeps going.
So who are these two guys making up the horn section?
So these guys, so we have Mike Mayer on the trumpet here,
Mike.
goes by Moz, and Chris Bullock on the tenor saxophone.
So Massimo, Mike, and Chris.
Yeah.
And then this guy right here.
And this gentleman right here is Mr. Corey Rawls on the drums. Here.
He's the most smiley drummer that we have ever had on this stage, which is, no, and I don't want you to help it. I think it's great. I think it's great. This is the Tyler Blanton and the Hornē Electric Band.
Yeah.
The first song that we heard was called I'll Put On Pants. I don't know. Before we talk about it, let's just actually go into the next song, and I want to see who's responsible. Who was not wearing pants when this song was made? Give it up one more time for Tyler Blanton and the Hornē Electric Band.
Dispatcher says there's something wrong with Dinah Carver.
Oh, that's my friend Sherry. She just came over to use a shower.
The story is ludicrous.
You must be here to fix the cable.
Lord, you can imagine where it goes from here.
He fixes the cable.
That's why they sent me. I'm like, but
Mr. Treehorn treats objects like women, man. He fixes the cable.
something fun here since y'all are having so much fun. I'm going to set the scene from what I imagine, and then you tell the audience if I'm right or not. So it's a typical Brooklyn Sunday where artists are trying to decide if they're going to pay rent or rent a caravan and go on tour. And y'all are sitting home having a bromantic Sunday. A bunch of bros in flannels with no pants on, watching a movie on his phone because nobody had paid their cable bill. The whole didn't pay rent thing kind of compounded with that. And as you're watching this movie, perhaps the Big Lebowski, someone gets a flashbulb moment and say, I got it, we're gonna call this, because you're looking at each other with no pants on, so this gets a little weird. I'm gonna call this, let's call ourselves the Hornē Electric Band, but can I get one, Corey? Can I get, you missed me with the, he didn't want to. And so you came up with the band name on that Brooklyn Sunday, and you weren't wearing pants, hence the first song. And then you were hoping someone would come and not fix the cable, but fix the cable in the typical Brooklyn way where we siphon cable for free. Have a seat and tell us, am I right? Am I right? First of all, I feel like I need a round of applause for that one.
You got it. Put it together.
Did I bring
it together? Yeah.
I did.
This isn't your first time
Not
doing
at all.
this.
I'm good. I'm good. I'm real good. So what parts of that are true? What parts of that can you clarify?
That was pretty much it to a T.
Well, what I love is that, you know, a lot of cats get on stage and the music is so groovy and they're just cool, right? Like, it's just like cool, barely want to talk, let me just play my songs, leave me alone, interview lady, right? But you guys are so smiley. I can tell that this whole thing is one big musical bromance. And we hear it and we feel it. So I want to know how much of your sound and your music is based off of these creative ideas you have in your mind, in your heart, or how much of it really just comes out of who you hang out with, the musicians that you know, and how you want to create music around these relationships?
Interesting, yeah. So, I mean, I'll originally write some of these ideas, and then as we play them, I feel like the songs get further and further away from what they originally set out to be. But whenever that happens, I almost every time, I love what it's become much more than, what it becomes is much more than I ever imagined to begin with. And a lot of that has to do with everybody putting their voice on it. And it's kind of an organism that's being fed initially by my idea, but then it's what Massimo does with it on the bass and what Corey does on the drums and the ideas we have. It develops from there. So the original kernel for that song was just this little Big Lebowski clip and this idea of I have this little riff, and we've kind of shaped it into this whole composition based on those initial ideas.
Why particularly that clip from the movie? He fixes the cable.
So that's just a really funny scene that for some reason it stuck with me, that quote of, you know, I'm the cable guy, I'm here to fix the cable. And when I was playing that, I was like, oh, this is kind of like, this could be like the background of one of those kind of films, you know, like kind of the groove with the bass. And I thought, oh, this could be like my modern music version of He Fixes the Cable.
Okay.
So,
right. I kind of feel like y'all secretly went to like college together for one semester
yeah.
and have extended that moment for the past like 10, 15 years. Okay, so what's interesting, speaking of voice, is that your first album, once you arrived in New York, was called Botanic, and that came out in 2010. And a few years later, your second album was called Gotham, and that was around 2014. Just from the titles alone, we can see what New York did to him. We're sorry. By the time you walked from the Botanic Garden to your apartment and saw the like pink slip on your door, it was like Gotham had arrived. But none of these albums, none of these projects have vocals on them. Is that correct?
Correct.
Good. So how much fun is that? Because there's no lyrics or no vocals to kind of dictate the message or the meaning, you get to have these really funny titles or, you know, these fun moments that just kind of create
Yeah.
a feel around the work.
Well, in a way, I could title it anything whatever because there's no vocals that need to be sung with it. You know, if I had a vocalist here and I said, okay, here's the song title, I might get some strange looks.
You would, you will,
But-
and you will by the time the show is over.
But I always joke with Corey is like, what song is that? Because
Right.
he doesn't remember us.
So is it just like an inside, just something to kind of like put a smile on your faces, or do they actually, aside from the sample in
Yeah.
this song, have a meaning?
Well, in that song was based around that idea of like this song could totally fit with the cable scene from Big Lebowski.
Okay.
And then the other song I'll put on pants. That's like you know when someone calls you like, oh man, I'm here. Someone comes to your apartment and you're supposed to meet someone. You're running late and they call you and you're like brushing your teeth and it's like, oh man, I'm at your door. Are you ready? And it's like, oh man, okay, I'll put on pants. I'll get things going. You know, like I'm like.
Okay.
So that's a song we start the set off with.
Right.
So it's an intro song. It's
So
like,
we're kind
all
of
right.
creating like a film
Yeah.
in between songs.
Right.
Well, what I thought was cool is that the sample from the Big Lebowski film comes from this machinery you have here, which is a great way to segue about your trajectory, not only with instruments, but also in the craft and the tradition of jazz. So we mentioned the marimba, which is an instrument that dates way back.
Right.
And has been found in Africa, and the marimba is largely made of wood, correct? And then the marimba evolves around 2000 BC into a xylophone. Is that correct? And the xylophone is also made of wood, and it has resonators underneath to help amplify sound or carry sound. And it also can be made of synthetic materials. And then you go from the xylophone to vibraharp, which is
Vibraphone or vibraharp, yeah.
1921-ish, and then vibraphone, which is not what this is. So this is what we joked about earlier about this is the iPad of vibraphones.
Yeah.
Called the
Right.
mallet cat.
This is called the mallet cat, yeah. But it's
Right.
essentially just a keyboard for a vibraphonist to play.
Right.
Because I play it the same way I would playing the vibraphone or
Right.
marimba.
So this is what a keyboard is to piano.
Exactly.
And the mallet cat, the name refers to the mallets that you use to play
Yeah,
with.
so this thing is called a mallet, which is what percussionists use to play any kind of instrument like this. And so this company they call this the mallet cat.
And cat is spelled K-A-T, which is a
K-A-T.
nod back to jazz tradition.
Yeah.
Who's that cat on the,
the cat
that ain't
on
a
the mallet
piano,
cat.
on the
Yeah.
vibraphone. Okay. All right, so we're gonna go into the next song and we're gonna talk about how these instruments kind of frame your sound, frame your relationship to jazz, and some other jokes that are sure to come
Yeah.
up in this. Give it up one more time for Tyler Blanton and the Hornē Electric Band. This song is called Dudes in Flannel. You are listening to Tyler Blanton and the Hornē Electric Band, which formed around 2015. There's no album yet to kind of contextualize all this, but it is a live experience, traces of which you can find on YouTube and on the interwebs. So we go from 2010 Botanic, which was more traditional jazz, to 2014 Gotham, which was jazz with electric influences, a fusion of these instruments that were making their way into your world and that you were exploring, and also carried the weight of your experience in New York City. And now we're here. We're still in New York, but this sounds really joyful and bright, kind of like the vibe of big band jazz. Yeah. There's this thing that happens in New York, tell me if I'm right, where you come here, you're bright-eyed and hopeful, and then after a couple weeks, you're like, and so then we got Gotham. And then there's a part where you're like, F it, we're just gonna take off our pants, put on some flannel shirts, things probably won't get paid, and just have maybe lots of sex or whatever it is that New Yorkers do, and you're just gonna say this is life and this is what it is, bills unpaid and all. What happened?
I love this. You're bringing it all together, and I love it.
I'm excited to do it. I don't even want to wait for you to tell me if I'm right or not. I'm going with my feelings. Answer this question, and then let's kind of come back to that. Jazz is, or finish this statement, rather.
Yeah, jazz is. That's really broad. I think jazz is an approach, not only to music, but to life.
Okay. Yeah. And if you had one word to qualify that approach, what would you say? If you could just give one.
I think one word, I guess this might require some explanation, but I guess vulnerable would be the word that comes to mind.
That's interesting, because I was thinking badass. I was going to say badass.
You were going on the other
my
side.
Own statement. Vulnerable. I think there is something about New York, and particularly Brooklyn, that really forces us to explore the vulnerability of being badass. What? You saw what I did there? Okay, good. Vulnerable.
Yeah.
Okay.
One word.
You did.
Yeah.
But you did good. I like that. I'm a little speechless for a second, and I'm back. Okay. Vulnerability, is that something that came out of your experience being in New York, or is that something that comes out of your experience being someone who's qualified as a jazz player who's using some non-traditional elements?
Yeah, it's part of the whole package. And for me, you mentioned like the first album, it's very much this, and then my next album was completely opposite, and then this is a totally different side of me. And I think you need to be willing to be vulnerable to bring different aspects of who you are to the public. And not everyone is comfortable doing that or doing that all at once. And to me, at least from my perspective, I'm all those things. I'm a serious jazz musician. I'm a traditionalist. I'm someone who likes rock and electronic music. I'm someone who would compose something very serious and heartfelt, but also I love stuff to just be silly. That's a big part of my personality. So to take the leap to bring that to the public, all these different facets of who you are, takes a bit of courage.
And, just in this setup, right? So you mentioned you obviously play the vibraphone, and you've really explored that. You moved to the mallet cat. You play the drums and guitar, and used to play in a metal band. And one of your former collaborators, or maybe he's still a collaborator, he's just not here today, he says, Tyler Blanton plays the kind of music that only another drummer would subject his band to.
I know who said that.
Because usually in most of these setups, particularly the trio, quartet, it's the piano, the air of a piano that would lead. But I guess he's saying you actually lead like a drummer, which is like leading from behind, right? So that's kind of interesting. I want to talk about your influences. Who are some of your influences that really got you to be a bit badass and vulnerable in your approach?
Okay, I like that. Just let me bring it together. So my first musical kind of figure, I guess, was my grandfather, who played saxophone. And he would always be playing, big band music and bebop and stuff. Like Thanksgiving dinner, it'd be like Bird would be playing. And at the time, I was like, I don't know about this. I don't know if I like this, but I was listening to that, and he would always bring out his horn, you know, at Christmas or Thanksgiving, like family get-togethers, and I think that was where I first connected that music can be very much a social and celebratory thing.
Yeah. And it can be rough and light at the same time, which is a perfect embodiment of your grandfather, right, Joe?
Right.
He was a contractor as well as a musician, so he had like gritty hands, but then also like a beautiful light touch on the instrument.
I mean, he was the toughest guy who, you know, you would do some chore and he would come back and tell you how you did everything wrong and to do it again.
Yeah.
I mean, he was one of these like first world Italian guys, and he had an incredible work ethic. I mean, this guy was up at 6 a.m., worked all day, would take a 20-minute nap and then go play a gig at night.
Right.
So, you know, he was in some ways tough as nails, but when it came time to party, it was always, let's play some songs and break out the horn.
An interesting embodiment as well of what jazz is, because you have people who approach jazz from a very technical, you know, standpoint, and then you have people who are free form. And so it seems like Grandpa Joe had a little bit of that. I want to talk a little bit more about him in that he passed away in 2002.
Yeah.
And I found out that when he passed away, your family asked that donations be made, not to the family, but to the San Antonio After School Band Program, which is really, really interesting, especially now. We just had National Walkout Day, where we're talking about putting guns in school as a mandate to protect schools, while we're also facing taking art out of schools. So it's like people are pro guns in schools, and some of the same people are pro taking art out of schools. If your grandfather was sitting in the audience, looking at you, proud, I'm sure, what would he say about not only this, but all of that?
Well, I think he might have a thing or two to say about what the music we're playing. But I think he would be proud that we kept it going. And you know, one thing that I always admire him for, even to this day, is that he was very big on giving back to, you know, he would play in rest homes, he would share, you know, his talents with, you know, people who thought they would enjoy it, you know, just for the joy of passing it along. And, you know, that's something that I always try to remind myself, like, you know, to be able to do this, you're really lucky to have the time and place and opportunity and talent and whatever to be able to do music.
And really lucky to have someone who was so accessible to you to show you the ropes, the gritty part, and also the celebratory part. Let's hold that thought. Let's go into the next song, which is called Stick Slicks. And we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about education and training, and then also balancing the two approaches some more. All right, give it up one more time for Tyler Blanton and Hornē Electric Band. And Corey, who's still smiling. Electric Band. This song was called Sticks Licks, and I have a very important question. It is not for you. It is for them. You don't need to be mic'd to answer it. Is this the horniest song that you all play, or does it get hornier than this? It's a real question. Just a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Is this the horniest?
We're sober, so no.
See, now you're confusing me. Okay, and on songs, even though this is called Sticks Licks, which made me felt like it was a kind of a drummier song, but I was wrong. On songs where it's not as horny, do you feel is equally as joyful? No answers. All right, cool.
That's about horny with an E?
Yes, duh. All right, y'all marinate on that, whatever. Let's go back to the conversation around education. Tyler, if you could give a message to the artists at home who are struggling between approach. So you have the young artists who are like, I'm not doing anything else. I'm dropping out of everything. I'm just going to sit here with whatever my instrument is, and I'm going to learn that way just by exploring it. And then you have artists who are in the conservatory going through theory and reading music and all of that process. And then you have the artists in between who are trying to do both. When you think about the impact of approach and education on really honing craft, from your vantage point, what would you say to them as a point of direction or inspiration?
I mean, wow, it's hard to give that kind of advice without knowing who it's going to, because it's such a personal thing.
Well, would you say know thyself? Would you say you just have to really, like, your first instrument you study is yourself, and then from knowing yourself, that's how you decide, or?
To some extent, but also I believe that we all change and evolve and grow as well. So who you are today might be different from who you might be in a year. And again, I think that goes back to being vulnerable, is being honest with yourself of, is this what I really love to do right now?
And you had a moment like that, because you said that you didn't want to be pigeonholed by the vibraphone, and then ta-da, the mallet cat showed up.
Right.
What was that transition like for you?
So again, I think if you follow your heart, or what really compels you, you find ways to do your thing and to think outside the box, as corny as that is.
Well, speaking of thinking outside the box, because we're trying to get it all in the time frame that we have, let's do something outside of the box, right?
Okay.
So the mallet cat is the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchild of the marimba, right? And marimba, for those that have an education moment, marimba, some people think it means two things. There was a ma, which means many, and rimba, which means a one-bar xylophone. And then there's a version that says it comes from Queen Marimba in Africa. In Africa, a woman, or sometimes depicted as a goddess, her name literally was Marimba, and Ma means mother, and Imba means song, so the mother of songs. And because I'm probably a descendant of her, I kind of feel like I should get a chance to see, really quickly, because this is really difficult to sit next to something like this and not like a 3-year-old So I feel like, can we?
You are the host.
I am the host, but I know how musicians are about their
You're
instruments.
welcome to.
Right, Corey? And can I just, so basically with this, forgive me, producer, for doing this, these are like drum pad, or rubber pads.
Let me turn on some sound.
Thank you. And so why this is special for me is because my father gave my mother what I thought was a xylophone when I was a little girl, and I will never forget this. But I learned today that it was actually a marimba, because it was all wood, and the structure of it is more resembles a marimba. How in the world do you know? Because this is...
There's no black keys and white keys.
Right, but on top of that, these are pads, and so there's sounds input in here. Do you remember where everything is? Is that how it works?
Yeah, so for different songs, I have sounds programmed that I switch to. You'll probably notice that I'm moving buttons. You got it, girl.
Sexual chocolate. I'm gonna do a little bit more later, but I don't want to be a hog.
You don't want to give it away.
I don't want to give it away. So it's tricky, because it's like you almost literally have to remember where you programmed everything in order to play it well.
Yeah.
Correct?
It's a bit of working out.
It is.
Yeah.
Speaking of working out, when you're not doing music, what do you do?
Well, all the cliche things. I cook.
You do.
I teach. I have some young piano students.
You are a teacher.
And
are you a parent?
And I'm not a parent.
Not
no.
a parent. Okay.
But and I, I'm making
you
espresso.
do make a mean espresso.
Yeah, it's usually the kitchen or music,
Okay.
and yeah, those two things keep me busy.
And another kind of random question: who are your top 5 MCs?
Oh wow, that one I'm not prepared for.
I know you're not. Be vulnerable and
You
also
got- you
badass.
got- the first one you've got me for, but the second, the badass part, I might come up shy.
That's
on
okay.
this
There was a
one.
woman here last time who sat here, and I asked her the same question, and she said Rihanna. And so we kind of laughed. And then the very next day, Rihanna came out with a rap song with Pharrell. And so, you may invent something new. So
Okay, there
go
we go.
for it. Give me at least 2.
I'll be vulnerable. Geraldo Rivera.
Who might be considered a whack MC, yes. But,
You know who I think would be a great MC is Obama.
Oh,
Obama would
without
be
a doubt.
the MC.
First of all, he started with the classic MC finish, which was the mic drop. Right?
Yep,
He ended
yep.
his career with the mic drop, and so maybe he'll segue from that into actually writing lyrics. And some of his favorite artists are rappers.
Yeah.
All right. I think that we kind of put in here as much as we could. Is there one thing that you want to say to the audience who seems to really love you, and then to the audience at home who may not be familiar with you, but who would love to follow you now? Is there one thing you want to say to everybody?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks. It's great to have you guys here today. It's been really fun. And
has been.
if you haven't, you can find us on the interwebs. You can find us online. It's Hornē with an E. We have Facebook. We don't have MySpace. I think that's gone. But we have Facebook, a website, and we're going to be making our first album this year. But we have a lot of stuff on YouTube, and we play a lot around Brooklyn. We played like over 20 gigs last year.
Which is a big deal.
In New York alone. So please come, get away from the screen and come out to a show and have fun with us.
And next time you see him, he will be rocking a flannel shirt so that he can be in alignment with these guys here. How
Got
you
the
feel over there,
memo.
Corey? You still feeling good? All right. Despite the many uncertainties of time, one thing is for sure. The distinctly American-grown jazz genre continues to unite disparate nations and notions of identity. With its complex historical legacy, its irrefutable futurism, and its timeless capacity to engage that which is both structured and free. Thank you, Tyler Blanton and crew. The tradition is very lit, and we wish you all well as you continue to carry the torch and electrify the music scene with equal parts reverence and risk-taking. And for those of you who are not ready for any more risks of missing B-side, that is, no need to fear. You can check out this and past episodes on our YouTube channel and listen to the B-Side podcast on BRIC Radio. Or, if you're really brave, come escape the Matrix and join us IRL right here at BRIC House during one of our live shows. I am your host. Queen GodIs representing Brooklyn to the fullest. We love y'all. Till next time. Thank you.